Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because we're looking at something so many of us have encountered, yet it remains incredibly tricky to navigate. We're talking about a complex, real-world team dynamic that just suddenly goes completely off the rails. Today, we're breaking down the anatomy of a workplace conflict. We'll be looking at the objective facts, the subjective experiences of the people involved, and honestly, just the sheer complexity of managing diverse teams.
So here's the big question to get us started. How does a routine leadership change turn into a full-blown workplace crisis? I mean, every single day, people get promoted, they get reassigned or shifted into new roles, right? Usually, it's just business as usual. But in the scenario we're about to unpack, a simple little change in the organizational chart triggered a complete breakdown in team cohesion. It really sets the stakes for everything we're going to dig into today.
But before we meet the specific people involved in this case, we really need to define the underlying theme governing all the invisible dynamics here, and that is unconscious bias. As our source material points out, these biases can be major sources of conflict in the workplace. The really important takeaway here is that if spaces aren't provided to actually talk about these biases openly, they fester. They grow into very serious discrimination problems. So definitely keep this concept in the back of your mind as we review the facts of the case.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1. The leadership transition, a shift in the status quo.
Okay, picture this. 2 years ago, Shonda Smith, an African-American woman, was put in charge of the third-year curriculum task force. Now, this group was largely made up of African-American teachers, and for 2 whole years, she successfully led this team. There were absolutely no reported problems. It was a stable, highly functional team. Then, just in recent weeks, everything shifted. Sharon McCready, who is Caucasian, took over the leadership of this exact same group. And, well, that brings us to today. The group, which Shonda is actually still a part of, has filed a formal complaint to management. So a completely stable 2-year run was just suddenly and entirely disrupted.
Now, to understand how we got to a formal complaint so fast, we need to look at the mindset of the incoming leader. Sharon McCready's entry wasn't necessarily one of aggressively taking over. According to the source, she was actually somewhat surprised by the job assignment. But, and this is super important, she felt she had a whole lot to bring to the project. She came in ready to utilize her skills and her past experience. Her intention, entering this new dynamic, was simply to contribute positively.
But, as we all know, intentions don't always match impact. Which brings us to Section 2, the group's complaint, the eruption of conflict.
What is really fascinating here is the specific trigger of the conflict. It wasn't about the curriculum itself, It wasn't about missed deadlines or budget cuts. The group filed a complaint with management about certain expressions Sharon had used in work meetings. Communication, literally just the words chosen in the day-to-day interactions of their meetings, became the primary point of friction that completely shattered the group's cohesion.
And they didn't just casually complain about the expressions, they escalated the situation significantly. The group took 2 very distinct, very serious steps. First, they accused management directly of discriminating against Shonda by replacing her. Second, they made a specific demand for a resolution. They asked that Shonda be put back in charge of the task force immediately. They totally drew a line in the sand.
Let's look at Section 3, Mutual Claims of Discrimination, the Competing Perspectives.
We are stepping into a classic clash of perspectives here, where we have to neutrally examine 2 drastically different realities. On one side, we have Shonda and the group. Their reality is that management discriminated against Shonda, and they are deeply frustrated and offended by Sharon's expressions in their meetings. On the flip side, we have Sharon's reality. She feels she is absolutely not receiving any credit for the positive contribution she's trying so hard to make. Furthermore, she feels that she is the one being discriminated against by the group because of her Caucasian background. Both sides have filed serious, mutual claims of racial discrimination. Both sides feel completely marginalized.
This brings us to our final phase, Section 4, the management dilemma, finding a path forward.
This grid right here brilliantly illustrates the gridlock. You have 3 distinct stakeholders. Sharon wants to contribute, but her core grievance is feeling ignored and discriminated against. Shonda and the group want their old leader back, and they're fueled by the grievance of problematic communication and perceived management bias. And then, you have management. Their objective is entirely pragmatic. Just ensure the group's work actually continues. But their grievance? Well, they are caught right in the middle of these mutual, highly sensitive discrimination claims.
Because at the end of the day, despite the heavy emotional weight and the very serious accusations flying around on all sides, the business reality is stark. Management must manage to reach an arrangement for the group's work to continue. Regardless of the interpersonal conflict, the burden falls directly on leadership to get this third-year curriculum project back on track. They literally cannot simply let the task force dissolve.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer today. And I want to turn this whole thing over to you. If you were management, considering those unconscious biases we defined at the very beginning of this session, how would you reach an arrangement? How do you validate both sides, address those potential invisible biases, and still manage to hit your project deadlines? It is not an easy puzzle to solve for sure, but it's an absolutely critical one for any modern workplace. Think about how you would navigate this minefield. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this scenario, and keep asking the tough questions. See you next time.